All right, welcome to the conversation. We've got a lot more guns being bought in this country. By the way, crime's also up. Those things might be related in two different ways, but we're going to bring on an expert to talk about it. Chuck Marino is the CEO of Sentinel Security Solutions. He's a former Department of Homeland Security advisor for Janet Napolitano, and he's former Secret Service Supervisory Special Agent. Chuck, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to be with you.
No problem. All right, so first of all, Chuck, it appears that it is not the usual suspects buying guns over the last year. It appears to be a much more diverse group of folks. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, let's talk about the year we've just gone through, right? With the pandemic, and on top of that, we also had the Defund Police initiative following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And what a lot of Americans are witnessing is that their local law enforcement department, their local officers are being limited in terms of the job that they can do to protect those citizens in the communities. I think we first need to start and agree that, the primary concern for American citizens year upon year is their number one concern is their safety and security. And if they feel that the government can't provide that for them, they're going to take steps to do that themselves. And that's where the problem comes in.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's a lot of things that are happening here at once, right? In the beginning of the pandemic, people were worried that oh my God, we're going to have shortages, and everybody's got guns. So then they figured, oh my God, if I'm the only one without a gun, I might be in trouble, right? Then we had the protest. But what's interesting is, it's not just a reaction that you would normally see out of the protests where the right wing go, oh my God, they're coming for us and we're going to go get the guns to protect ourselves. But it was also a lot of minorities who were worried that the police were going to kill them and that they needed a gun. And they were also worried, some of them were also worried about the protests and the riots that came out of it, et cetera. And so I just want to give some stats here to the audience. Firearms industry data shows that sales went up by 50% for black customers, 47% for Hispanics, and 43% for Asian Americans. And of course, there was a wave of violence against Asian Americans as well. So within that, Chuck, have you seen this before, or is this like relatively new, where left-wingers, minorities, et cetera, are going to get guns at a much higher rate?
No, as you mentioned, I mean, there's a national shortage on ammunition. I mean, these are things that we haven't seen in any recent history here in terms of gun sales, ammunition sales, and really, I think, to be frank, it's just the whole narrative of what's been going on this year has really been good for no one. Right. We know Tim Scott and Cory Booker are working on national police reform efforts. Listen, everyone in law enforcement will tell you, of course, the profession can be better. But has it been good to kind of villainize 800,000 men and women based on the actions of a few? I don't think that's been good for anybody. It certainly hasn't been good for the country. And certainly for the past year, law enforcement has been kind of taking the hammer in terms of being criticized and put on the sidelines. And I think everybody's just very concerned about that, because one thing that everyone does agree on is that they feel comfortable seeing police in their communities. Now, can community policing programs be stronger? You betcha. Can training be better? Yep. Technology available to the police officers? They should have it. But none of this involves defunding. It actually involves more money and spending it more wisely.
Yeah, see, Chuck, that's where we disagree. So I don't think it's true at all that more everybody feels safer with police around. I mean, I think if you asked the average black man in this country, let alone black woman, you would not get that answer. So that doesn't mean they're in favor of defunding the police. I've seen the polling on that, right? And defunding the police is not a helpful frame. It's not a good slogan, right? Because it's misleading. They're not saying get rid of the police. They're saying take some portion of the money and spend it on social services for the mentally ill, et cetera, instead of putting it all into hammers, if you will, and then everything seems like a nail.
But unless you're in Minneapolis, right, and where they do want to dismantle the police.
Well, some small portion of the left wing does, and so Look, but Chuck, the policing in this country is it's not a few bad apples. So that's where the heart of our disagreement might be. It's the culture is to use overwhelming force, and it's not just against minorities. We've now covered endless stories where they shoot white people far too quickly. Now, of course, if they're poor or middle class, rich are completely different. They're above the law. But yeah, they're taught, don't take any chances, put them down. And that's a huge problem in this country. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I don't think it's as bad as you make it out to be. I think, listen, police officers are trained to use deadly force when needed to protect life, right, and liberty. And if someone's got a weapon, then they've got to use deadly force, unfortunately, to match that threat. But I mean, yeah, are there mistakes made? Yes. Is there a grotesque use of force like we saw by Derek Chauvin against George Floyd, where nobody is trained to do that across law enforcement, and he was quickly, demonized for taking the actions that he did? You betcha. I mean, that disgusted a lot of people across law enforcement. That's just not what you're trained to. It did. Absolutely.
Because Chuck, all the other cops there saw him doing it live. And they let him do it and they helped him do it. Why? Because of the culture. You know that. You know the culture is don't ever, ever disagree with another officer, no matter what they're doing in public. Always back them up. That's what the whole thin blue line is. We're a gang and we're gonna protect our own.
There are things where officers are trained, they need to be trained to be more vocal. When they see something wrong, they need to speak up, they need to stop it. You're right. In that situation, he should have been knocked off George Floyd or taken off or dragged off by the other officers. You're exactly right. And that's part of the training. But a lot of these officers, they're working 12, 14 hours a day. They're being promised training time. They're not getting training time. I mean, some of these guys are qualifying with their handguns maybe one time a year if they're lucky. Is that really what we want in police officers out on the street? That's what the defunding is doing here to police departments. And we need to get away from that.
So, but Chuck,
why not?
So here's the situation. So when we give more money to policing, does it go towards better training? No, most of the time it goes towards tanks and more heavily militarized police, and it puts them in a state of mind of an occupation rather than serving the community. I saw them rolling down the street in Los Angeles with tanks. I mean, it's absurd. It's totally absurd.
Yeah.
And that's what they're spending the money on. So do I want to defund that portion of it? Sure I do. And look, but an even more core issue is when you talk about the training. So we've covered stories on the show where we show, in fact, we did a story on Monday where we showed, no, the cop's not, it doesn't appear the cop is planting false evidence. That's what the video looked like. But no, if you look at the whole video, you see that's not the case. We've covered stories where a cop shoots someone and it turns out they did have a weapon and they were turning around. There you don't have a choice, you have to shoot, right? But Chuck, far too often, they're not sure it's a weapon and it turns out to be a cell phone or nothing at all, because I'm afraid the training is telling him, don't take any risks. If you think maybe they have a weapon, just kill them. And you know this slogan, better to be judged by 12 than carried out by 6.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And are we ever gonna fix the training where we tell them, no, you have to be relatively certain that it's a weapon, which means yes, you have to take some risk with your life, but that's what being a police officer is, because we don't want you shooting innocent civilians.
Yeah, I think, listen, this is where, I mean, you and I have a lot of common ground on this, and that is there's a lot of technology out there, right, to help de-escalate, to use less than lethal force where you can, and we have to make all those things available to the police officers. Listen, one thing you and I are gonna agree on right off the bat, is it acceptable in this day and age that a police department in the 21st century still doesn't have body-worn cameras on their officers?
No,
I think that's ridiculous, right? I think that's ridiculous that there's a police department or two that exist in this country whose officers still don't have these cameras. And you want to know one jurisdiction that still doesn't have them? Portland. And why don't they have them? Because the mayor says he doesn't have the money to get them for the police officers. So my question naturally is, well, where are these millions of dollars in grants from the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice that are supposed to be used for technologies just like that? So there you have politics coming into play, where for some reason the mayor, Wheeler, in Portland doesn't want his officers to have body-worn cameras. And I think that's unfair to both the officers and the citizens of Portland.
Yeah, the body cameras are, you're right, we totally agree on. Right? That would be the very first thing that I would fund. And US Marshals have a similar issue at the federal level, and it's totally unacceptable. And the videos are making a difference in public perception, which eventually leads, hopefully, to the right solutions. Yeah, I'm not overly convinced that the bipartisan group that you mentioned earlier are going to come up with meaningful reform. But I hope they do, and I hope the public pressure leads to more and more reform. But unfortunately, we're out of time. There's more I want to talk to you about in regards to the crime spree and the potential reasons, but we'll do that on another day. Chuck Marino, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
All right, thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.